Hey, what's up, church family? For those of you who see this, you'll see this in real time, but I am pre recording from our getaway, I guess we're calling that, in South Carolina. Many of you have been tracking with our pictures that we've posted on our various social media pages. And we are enjoying ourselves as an opportunity to decompress, get some downtime as we or before we jump back into our hectic ministry schedule. And again, let me just say thank you to those of you who have been incredibly kind with your words as I enter into a new role that has become public. So thank you again for your verbal support and the shout outs. I really appreciate it. Before I jump into our conversation tonight, I want to just remind you that we are going forward and we're excited about it with the college support of our college students. We've been mentioning that for the last couple of weeks. Lady Dion will be reaching out to individuals personally to make a request and an ask of you, a financial request and ask of you to be supportive of our college students. Also wanted to remind you, as I do every week, that our Tuesday morning prayer is at 8 a.m. It's a pretty vacuous uh, uh, time, but we show up every single Tuesday. We believe that there's power in prayer, and while God does not change, God changes not. We believe that prayer changes us. And so we are consistent and we believe that there is power in collective prayer. Also, wanted to remind you that on the 31st, we are having our first in-person return service at 9:30 a.m. at 6 Stony Hill Road in Bethel, Connecticut. That's our church home, Suite 220. Many of you have seen the pictures regarding the change and transformation that has taken place with that. And so we're really excited to get you back in there. Our registration for that service will go out the week of that service. And so for those of you who are interested in returning to our in-person gathering, of course, they will be much smaller, much more controlled, much more managed. But we are really looking forward to a grand and glorious time. We're so thankful for technology and being able to engage virtually, but you cannot simulate human engagement. And so we're excited about an opportunity to be able to do that again. And so we'll talk more about what that looks like after we launch it on the 31st, but we're excited about you being a part of that. So be paying attention to that, which leads me to the 26th, where we will be meeting at the church in person to plan and map out logistics for the 31st. And so for those of you who are interested in being a part of our relaunch experience on the 31st, we're encouraging you to be there at 6:30 p.m. At our church to map that out. I will be calling some individuals as well to personally solicit your support in leadership in doing that. So be on the lookout for that phone call. But we really are excited about that return. So I think that is all of my announcements that I want to kind of get out of the way before we jump into our conversation tonight. Let me pray, and then we'll just kind of see what God has to say. God, thank you for a time to be together tonight. I do pray that you would meet us in this conversation, and I pray that folks will find meaning in it, that folks' hearts will be stirred, that their consciousness will be pricked, and that they will be encouraged to live fully and wholly into your word. We ask all of this now in your Son and our Savior, Jesus Christ. I'm not going to be before you long this evening. I do hope that while it is concise, that you'll find something beautiful in the content. I just mentioned to you that we are away, debriefing and decompressing and enjoying ourselves. But so you already know where we are, and if you've been following us on social media, you've seen some of the pictures already. So I don't have to reiterate too much of that. But I will say this: today, we had the privilege to visit an island called Dufosky Island. Its history is rich, and yet it is recalcitrant. It is filled with a history of resilient people. It was originally inhabited by the Muskogee Indians, as this nation was. Not the Muskegees, but the Native Americans, the indigenous people of this land. But the American slave trade brought in the Africans from predominantly West African nations. These folk who landed or who were brought to Dufusky Island created a beautiful expression mixed with Creole and traditional West African culture. The language that they created is a hybrid of old broken English and traditional West African languages. They mimic the Jamaican patois, Belizean, Bajan, and I can't think of the name of our brothers and sisters from Barbados. But according to history, the languages or the sound of their pronunciation mimic that. And we had an opportunity to hear some of that today. What a beautiful expression it was. This mix has been called Gullah. They have been affectionately known as the Gullah people. You may be familiar with the Gullah Islands. They stretch from the North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia seacoast. Our time on the island, 5 hours to be exact. I started reflecting on the Wednesday night series that we have been in on biblical anxiety. Now, let me just say this. I have been to the African continent. My wife is Jamaican, so I have touched West Indian soil, and I am from Virginia, where the first enslaved Africans were brought. And so I am no stranger to travel, nor am I a stranger to history. But today I could not help but think about the mental anguish and the duress, the pain of loss and the pressure to perform, and a reshaping of spirituality amid stress and strain of a group of people who found themselves in a foreign land, expected to perform as if everything was normal. And it caused me to revisit a passage and a predominant perspective that perhaps is inconsiderate and theologically insipid. This evening, I want to read a pericope. That is just a fancy word that means a portion or a fraction of two passages or three passages from two chapters found in Exodus chapter 16 and Exodus chapter 17. And after I read it, I won't give you three takeaways. I won't give you 3 steps to deal with your anxiety or a host of principles that perhaps will help you be this or to do that. Let me just simply say this. There's some quotes that I was looking at earlier that I want to read for you. And then I'll read these scriptures. And then I'll read a final quote. And that'll be our time for this evening. There's a quote that says, "You never know how strong you are until being strong is your only choice." Let me read that for you one more time, real slow. You never know how strong you are until being strong is your only choice. The other quote that I came across today says this: life doesn't get easier or more forgiving. We get stronger and more resilient. Can I give you that one more time? I love reiteration. I think it helps us. It helps to settle what it is that's just been said in our spirit, our soul, and our mind. Life doesn't get easier or more forgiving. We get stronger and more resilient. We're talking about biblical anxiety. And I mentioned to you earlier, before I read chapter 16 and chapter 17, a few verses from each one of those chapters, in context, we're talking about biblical anxiety. And I said to you that I believe that the predominant perspective that we have taken from the passages that I'm getting ready to read perhaps have been inconsiderate and theologically insipid. Let me read these passages. And when I read them, perhaps you'll understand what I'm saying. We know the passage. Well, let me just give you this. We know the story of Moses and him delivering the children of Israel out of the hands of Pharaoh and into the wilderness and eventually into the promised land. I don't have time to unpack whether that is a legitimate narrative or whether it is um, uh, um, a beautifully crafted story that deals with the people whose life was up and down and overcoming tremendous obstacles as a nomadic group of people. And this is a narrative that found its way in many oral traditions related to that particular group of people. I don't want to get into that. That there's evidence that would suggest that perhaps the narrative is not as straight and narrow as those of us who ascribe to the message and the stories is found in the Bible. But whether you do ascribe to that literally, and I'm okay with that, I do want to say to you that it talks about as these people were coming out of this place of being enslaved, it said that they started moaning and groaning and complaining about where they had just come from, which was slavery. And the picture that we as preachers have painted was that they were a bunch of stiff-necked, complaining, ungrateful kind of a people. Well, I want to push back on that today. As I visited that island today, it's a beautiful island. My wife and I were talking, and it's a Caribbean kind of feel. It's just beautiful. The seacoast is just beautiful. And much of the island has been kept intact. And so you got a real feel, perhaps in all of its splendor, you got a real feel of the horrific treatment of a particular group of people on that island. And again, I thought about this concept and this idea and this real thing called biblical anxiety. And we've said as a premise and a thesis from lesson 1, and this is lesson 6, that those of us who ascribe to the ministry, the message, the methodology, and the mission of Jesus are not exempt from anxiety. So let's revisit a group of people who were anxious, who had been under stress and duress for 300 years. And we're saying in a 40-year period, they were supposed to be okay. I'm going to push back on that narrative, the way that we have taught that traditionally. Let me read Exodus chapter 16, and I want to read verses 22 through 25. And it says, Then Moses led the people of Israel away from the Red Sea, and they moved out into the desert of Shur. They traveled into this desert for 3 days without finding any water. When they came to the oasis of Mara, the water was too bitter to drink. So they called the place Mara, which means bitter. Then the people complained and turned against Moses. What are we going to drink? They demanded. So Moses cried out to the Lord for help, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. Moses threw it into the water, and this made the water good to drink. It was there at Marah that the Lord set before them the following decree. as a standard to test their faithfulness to him. He said, if you will listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, obeying his command and keeping all of his decrees, then I will not make you suffer any of the diseases I sent on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. Let me read 22 and 25 through 25 again, because that's where I want us to kind of focus our attention. That's where I want to settle into your spirit as we think about biblical anxiety, the stress and the duress and the pressures that are real in our lives. And I want to push back on this narrative that somehow these were just complaining, stiff-necked people, but these were people who had not yet been 40 years up from 300 years of slavery. Then Moses led the people of Israel away from the Red Sea, and they moved out of the desert of Shur. They traveled in the desert for 3 days without finding any water. When they came to the oasis of Marah, the water was too bitter to drink, so they called the place Marah, which means bitter. Now I want to drop down. I'm sorry, that was verse 15. That was chapter 15. My apologies. That was chapter 15, verses 22 through 25. Now let me read chapter 16. I'm going to read verses 1 through 3. Then the whole community of Israel set out from Elim and journeyed into the wilderness of Sin, or Sion, depending on your pronunciation. Between Elim and Mount Sinai, they arrived there on the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. There too, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted. But now you have brought us into this wilderness to starve us all to death. Let me reiterate that 300 years of being a part of an enslaved group of people, not yet 40 in trying to figure out what it means to be free. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted, but now you have brought us into this wilderness to starve us all to death. Let's drop down to verse 9 in chapter 16 of Exodus. Then Moses said to Aaron, announce this to the entire community of Israel. Present yourself before the Lord, for he has heard your complaining. And as Aaron spoke to the whole community of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness. There they could see the awesome glory of the Lord in the cloud. I'm focusing in on anxiety, stress that is real when we find ourselves in precarious and awkward situations. And I'm looking at long-term duress and long-term stress and long-term anxiety and continual anxiety, ongoing and lingering. But in each one of these passages in 15 and now in chapter 15 and chapter 16, I've given you a glimpse of the Lord's response to a group of people who were anxiety. God always showed up and responded. Let's look at chapter 17. I'm out of here. Water from the rock. Many of you know this story. At the Lord's command, the whole community of Israel left the wilderness of Sin and moved from place to place. Eventually, they camped at Rephidim, but there was no water there for the people to drink. So once more, the people complained against Moses. Give us water to drink, they demanded. Quiet, Moses replied, getting angry now. It's been 2 chapters. Why are you complaining against me? And why are you testing the Lord? But tormented by thirst, they continued to argue with Moses. Remember what I said? 300 years of their lives and their families' lives connected to slavery. Enslaved people. and not yet 40 years of trying to be free. But tormented by thirst, they continued to argue with Moses. Why did you bring us out of Egypt? Are you trying to kill us, our children, and our livestock with thirst? Then Moses cried out to the Lord, what should I do with these people? They are ready to stone me. The Lord said to Moses, walk out in front of the people, take your staff, the one you used when you struck the water of the Nile, and call some of the elders of Israel to join you. I will stand before you on the rock at Mount Sinai. Strike the rock, and water will come gushing out. Then the people will be able to drink. So Moses struck the rock as he was told, and water gushed out as the elders looked on. Moses named the place Massah, which means test, and Meribah, which means arguing, because the people of Israel argued with Moses and tested the Lord by saying, is the Lord here with us or not? People learning how to deal with real anxieties, real stresses, real worries, real fear. And they sought the highest representative of God that they knew, and that was Moses. Jesus has come. The veil has been torn. His teachings tell us that we have direct access. We don't have to go through anybody anymore. So there's not necessarily a Moses that we need to go through. But if you dig deep into the principle and pull back the layers, you will discover that every time they made their anxieties vocal, God responded. I want you to know tonight that God hears and sees what it is you're going through. Hold on. Deliverance is on the way. I thought there was one more passage that I wanted to read you, but I guess it isn't. And so I'll simply reiterate the passages or the quotes that I just read to you a few moments ago. You never know how strong you are until being strong is your only choice. These people in the wilderness realized that. Life doesn't get easier or more forgiving. We get stronger and more resilient. These people in this text realized that. The Gullah people on Dafusky Island realized that. I want to say to you tonight, I need you to realize that while our anxieties and our stresses are real, our God is bigger. Amen. Love y'all. Have a wonderful night. Peace and blessings.